Okay, the standard question, can everyone see the slides? All right.
Looking good. Yeah, looking
Great.
good.
Great. Well, thanks so much for this opportunity to share our work with you. My name is Liz Hart. I am the project director for the Targeting Natural Resource Corruption Project, which is a USAID-funded consortium of conservation and anti-corruption organizations that are working to harness knowledge, generate evidence, and especially support innovative practice and policy for effective anti-corruption programming to achieve conservation goals. So this is a project that's aimed at conservation specifically, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So again, just really pleased to have the chance to present to you all here some of our experience and the project over the last 3.5 years and where we're headed in the closing years. So we'll cover a little bit of the logic of the project, the kind of why, what, and how. The TNRC project did, in fact, develop a results chain. I think I saw Arlene on the call, and Arlene was an excellent facilitator of our process 3+ years ago now. And then we'll share with you a little bit of what integrating anti-corruption perspectives into conservation programming might look like, starting with a little bit of logic about corruption itself, just because that's an important kind of unpacking stage for then integrating it into conservation work. And then we'll share a few resources, and hopefully there'll be a little time for your feedback as well, because we'd really love to hear from you about the kinds of resources we're going to be developing in the next couple of years and how useful they may be for you and people doing the same kind of work that you are. So first, just to set the scene a little bit, why should we care about corruption in conservation and natural resource management? Well, in the language of the conservation measures, conservation creates direct and indirect threats to nature and people. One thing to be clear about here is that we're not so much talking about the possible corruption within the management of a project. That's a different set of mechanisms and considerations usually covered by due diligence, internal control policies, audits, things like that. What we're really talking about is the impact of corruption in the context where we work on the objectives of conservation. So corrupt actions are the means by which many negative behaviors with negative impact on corruption and natural resource management objectives are made easier or less risky for the perpetrator, with significant impacts on systems, both as direct threats, as I said. So for instance, corrupt fishing and logging permits, corrupt access to wildlife and poaching opportunities, and also then indirect threats, for instance, misdirected funds for ecosystem service payments or reduced incentives and commitment to conservation because of corruption. So these, and then in addition, as conservation specialists, we often think about wildlife, forest, and marine supply chains, those things that I just mentioned. But in addition, you see here some of the other broader impacts of corruption related to natural resources. And because we're a little short on time, I won't go through all of those, but I think you can see the kinds of impact that we're talking about. So to respond to those impacts, the objective of the TNRC project is essentially to strengthen conservation and natural resource management practitioner efforts to reduce the negative impact of corruption on conservation and biodiversity outcomes. So to reduce those threats and to do that, what we try to affect is the practices and knowledge of conservation practitioners. So as you see, we use the language of common results. The first of our results on the far end of our results chain, for those of you who can imagine a Marathi chart, is to improve the knowledge of practitioners. Then we hope to support them to improve their own practice of integrating conservation and anti-corruption perspectives into their conservation work. And finally, to institutionalize some new approaches as we leave our 5-year project. And one of the things we do is we target for institutionalization partners that we work with most closely, thinking of those as boundary partners. And that is USAID, WWF, and our partner Traffic, because this is where the practitioners are in our consortium. And really thinking of that boundary partner concept of if we can institutionalize some changes in the way we do our policy and practice within these institutions, we hope that will have then a ripple effect throughout the conservation community. So that's kind of the logic of our institutionalization approach. And just to say a little bit more about that, now kind of moving to the other end of our results chain, we have 3 strategic approaches that define how we try to achieve these goals. So most of our first 3 years was spent building knowledge and communicating that knowledge, with some support for applying knowledge and testing hypotheses. And let me just show you a little bit about where that happens. Through a mechanism, for those of you who are familiar with USAID funding, TNRC is a leader with associates awards. So the core knowledge project is based at WWF in the US with our consortium members that you saw on the first slide. And, but at the same time, there's also an opportunity for USAID missions around the world to support programming directly in their countries through an associate award mechanism. So on this map, you can see 4 areas where associate awards are underway. One of them is very small and not quite, actually, I think maybe isn't even on there yet because it's not signed yet, but one more in Central America. At the same time, we're also supporting through our core project a few pilot activities, and those are the green ones that you see. And that's another way that we try to support some learning by doing and testing some ideas around the world. Then also, as you see, we have original research going on in a handful of countries as well. So that's part of our knowledge building. And then just to say a little bit about some of the adaptations we're making as we come into the later part of our project. So in our first 3 years, as I mentioned, we were mainly focused on Common Result 1, generating knowledge. And we've initiated in this past year what I call a strategic turn. So we're not changing strategies, but we're changing emphasis and moving more toward delivering guidance and technical support. So really trying to focus more on the knowledge uptake in practice, and then working on some ways that we can leave behind a kind of a footprint of new ways of new work processes, new ways of doing things within the organization, the organizations that we target as boundary partners. So what that looks like in practice for us is moving toward what we're calling a focus on GTS, guidance and technical support. So if you go to our website, for instance, you'll see a lot of really interesting and I think quite important papers, but things that you might consider more kind of the typical research papers. That kind of establish the knowledge base across the work that we're doing. But what we're really trying to do now is re-emphasize how we translate that knowledge into more concrete support for practitioners. And the first way we're doing that is to redesign our knowledge hub on our webpage around, rather than simply having all the papers listed and being able to search them through different filters, we're actually working on creating some kind of narrative mapping of 8 different topic areas that I'll share with you in a separate slide later, to help people who come to the website kind of be able to look at the range of issues involved in corruption and anti-corruption, and then kind of identify a little bit more, kind of walk them through some of the issues that are relevant under each of these topic areas. And then at the same time, developing more concrete guidance products and actually engaging more directly with technical support to offices that are trying to do some of this work. So that's kind of the reorientation of our logic for the last 2 years of our project. Happy to answer some more questions about that later if there are any. So then moving to the second part, what does integrating anti-corruption perspectives into conservation programming look like? I thought it would be useful maybe just to start about what does corruption look like in natural resource management and conservation work. So again, in the interest of time, I won't go through this slide in detail. This is actually taken from an introductory training course that anyone can take if you like. We'll share that link at the end. But really, I think what's important to absorb from a slide like this is just that corruption takes many different forms. Sorry, is someone trying to?
Yeah, it does sound a bit wobbly. Maybe just everybody check they're muted.
Yeah, I was just wondering if somebody was trying to tell me I needed to hurry up.
Oh, no, don't think so.
Good. So just take from this slide, I think, the awareness that, you know, we may all come to corruption and anti-corruption discussions with our kind of initial ideas about what corruption is. Corruption is many, many different things. And one of the things the training course tries to do is unpack this a little bit. So here are just many kinds of examples. It's important to realize that it can happen at many different levels, including the global level, where a lot of the challenges related to illicit financial flows and laundering the proceeds of corruption and laundering the proceeds of environmental crime take place, all the way down to local levels. So what we really encourage is using a corruption lens on our work, but not necessarily trying to say, you know, our objective is to reduce corruption. It's rather to reduce the impact that corruption has on what we're trying to achieve. So how do we go through that process of analyzing where is corruption happening? What kind of corruption is it? Who's involved? What are our opportunities to respond to that? Within the, you know, the environment that we're in. Some environments are much more permissive and much more supportive of anti-corruption work than others. So again, it's a lot about unpacking. And then just to say also anti-corruption approaches, there's a lot of different approaches to that. So we also need to unpack those responses as well. So when we do that analysis of what's really happening within the sector we're working or the particular landscape or seascape, the other thing we need to do then is also consider the right responses, because not every response will be right for every setting. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Preston Witt, who is actually going to show you one of how we're kind of developing some of our new guidance, which I hope will give you a little bit more understanding of kind of how these broad principles that I've just articulated might translate into an example from a particular project or set of concerns. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Preston, you can take over.
Thanks, Liz. Hi, everyone. I'm Preston. I'm the anti-corruption advisor for TNRC. Let me see if I can share my screen. There we are. Okay. Just some nods to make sure you can all see the Marathi.
Yeah, all good.
Excellent, thank you. So I'll touch on some of the content just to give a taste, but the real my goal with this this quick demonstration is to really take this opportunity to get feedback from the folks on the call. This is one of the first times that we're really taking this theory of change, results chain approach in the actual guidance that we're producing for practitioners. And so any thoughts any of you have on how we can make this more useful, or whether or not this is useful, or if anyone wants to get in touch and go into more detail later, please feel free to let me know. So the piece of guidance that I'm working on is on sustainable livelihoods. Specifically looking at payment for ecosystem services, the co-benefits from carbon compensation projects, as well as benefit sharing with protected areas and other effective conservation measures. So this example is from the carbon compensation piece. So the first step, I took the high-level generic theory of change from the Conservation Action and Measures Library, CAML, for linked enterprises and alternative livelihoods, and just tweaked it a little bit to be for kind of the type of carbon compensation project that I'm targeting with this guidance. And so you can see that this is just the standard chain from CAML, that if you have the enabling conditions in place, then you'll be able to set up a suitable compensation and benefit sharing system. Key stakeholders will realize benefits, they'll change their behaviors and attitudes, and also take action to prevent external threats, and that'll help you achieve your ultimate outcomes, in this case, some community co-benefits, development, social outcomes, as well as sort of maintaining the carbon sink, maintaining the forest or the seagrass bed. So with the next step, I took that high-level results chain and added in just a few places where corruption risks might cause that result chain to break down. You can think of these as sort of like assumptions that where the corruption risks might intervene and cause your different intermediate results not to lead to the next intermediate result, and therefore you never get to your ultimate outcomes. So if you don't have all the enabling conditions in place, when you're trying to set up your program, for example, there's a risk of manipulation of data and other kind of fraud with the co-benefits or the environmental claims. So thinking, for example, with REDD+, if when you're calculating the baseline of deforestation, if you say, well, baseline scenario, 100% of the trees are going to get cut down, but in reality, only 75% of the trees would get cut down, then you could technically benefit from the carbon compensation without actually doing very much. Similarly, there are risks of kind of over-representing, overselling the co-benefits to communities to get them to buy in, and then perhaps never actually delivering on those co-benefits. And then also with environmental claims, often a lot of the carbon compensation projects want like diverse forest ecosystems, for example, but it's often a lot simpler and a lot cheaper just to have like a mono species of tree. And maybe if someone ever does come to inspect that, well, you just pay them a bribe and they say everything's okay. Even then, if you sort of get the program set up and you actually have a suitable compensation and benefit sharing program set up, there are several risks that might intervene between having that program and key stakeholders actually realizing and receiving meaningful benefits. So a relatively obvious one, especially if there's financial co-benefits involved, would just be like outright theft or capture of compensation flows. The sort of promise of being able to capture those flows might incentivize certain elites or local project components to engage in impropriety or exclusion or coercion in the consultation and engagement stage, where if they really want the project to succeed, perhaps they bribe some of the neighborhood committee heads to support the project, or they exclude people that they know would raise significant concerns, in fact, concerns that may later cause the project to collapse, they make sure that those people don't get invited to the consultation. And then those people both don't get to raise those concerns that would help you design a better project, but also lose the ability to benefit from the project. So that's something that would be quite common if there are kind of social norms of exclusion along different divisions in the community. So with these corruption risks, and in the actual guidance document, there are lots of links and literature about sort of where each of these risks came from. I then, as part of the third step, took the more detailed generic theory of change for this linked enterprises and alternative livelihoods, and really leaving in kind of the standard activities that are part of this high-level template, added in a few anti-corruption responses to show how those activities could be integrated into a conservation project relatively simply. So this is that more detailed version, and just to highlight a few examples. So a key part of getting the enabling conditions in place would be identifying the appropriate participants. And so you have the standard activity from CAMEL about who the targeted stakeholders are and how to identify them. And so the piece that we've added is this activity about, well, maybe do a corruption risk assessment to inform your selection of partners. And you can see here, we've included several links to other resources for carrying out those corruption risk assessments. For the risks around exclusion and coercion in getting stakeholder consent, we've added several resources for ensuring that elite capture doesn't occur in the consultation, and that you actually do achieve free, prior, and informed consent. There are a couple of resources around different integrity requirements for like auditors who are going to be doing the environmental audits, the managers of any of the financial elements of the program, and any intermediaries, especially if like there are cash transfers happening. So you can see here links to other frameworks and other tools to help ensure that or reduce the risk that those funds get diverted. Yeah, I realize that we're short on time, and as you can see, there's quite a lot here. The guidance is, like I said, still being developed, but will eventually be kind of a standard report with as well these three Marathi results chains for each of those three chapters: the payment for ecosystem services, the carbon compensation, and the protected areas and OECNs. But I'll stop there. I'm not sure, Liz, if you have any last slides to wrap up, but like I said, really excited to hear if anyone has any thoughts or suggestions for this.
Great, thanks, Preston. And yes, I think we'd like to pause here. The only other slides we have are just some on resources, but we'd love to pause here and just get a little feedback on, on this kind of guidance and whether or not that's, let's see, we've moved to the wrong slide here. So yeah, just whether this is what would be a useful approach, if there's any suggestions on how to make it stronger, any other suggestions for model theories of change like the one that Preston just shared. Here are the 8 themes that I mentioned earlier that will be the kind of organizing themes for the new knowledge hub, and also the ones around which we're working on guidance. So if you have questions or suggestions, Carolyn or do we have time for a little discussion now, Will?
Yeah, sure. Just briefly, but thank you so much for sharing all that so far. John, I see you've raised a hand.
Yeah, thanks, Will. And thanks, Liz and Preston. I think that what you've done, Preston, is fantastic. It's really outstanding and really useful just right off the shelf. So thank you so much for doing that. And just one tiny suggestion, you might consider adding the plus anti-corruption in a different colored font or something, just so it pops and jumps out a little bit more. That's just a tiny suggestion because I really think what you've done is extremely helpful. So thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Paulina?
Ginger, quiet. Ginger, down.
Ginger got in the way.
Yeah.
Preston, Liz, this is an amazing presentation. Thank you for that. Great resources. I was wondering, and I'm sure it's very context specific, but if in your looking at several projects and places, are there certain activities that have elevated it to be more effective in curbing the corruption and so forth, or is it just too complex to really even identify?
It's a great question, and I'm sure Liz has a response as well. Specifically for the guidance, it was something that I considered and tried a few different ways of really highlighting kind of resources or approaches that, like there are 10 things, and if you can only do one, probably do this one. Because as has been said a trillion times, because it is so context specific, we went instead with the kind of presenting everything in a very representative way, and then just trusting it to the practitioner to say, oh, that risk really sounds similar to what could happen here, and oh, but that response, that's not really feasible with our resources and our rules, but that one is, so we'll try that one. I did in the guidance highlight there are a few there, as you saw, are a lot of great resources, but there are some that are just truly excellent. And so I did highlight those as really key resources. So if you don't have time to go through and look at all these different hyperlinks, at least look at these 5. So that was kind of the compromise.
Yeah, and just to say a little bit more on sort of what works. I've been in the anti-corruption field in the development space for something almost close to 20 years, and I think really what works is so context specific. There have been a few reviews of evidence over time that suggest that certain kinds of things may be more effective on a kind of an average level, including things like public financial management reforms, things like that. But really, it depends so much on a great law enforcement program that reduces, that increases investigations, may work fabulously in Hong Kong and terribly in Malawi, or because of the resources that are available, because of the the enabling environment that's available, whatever. So it's really, I think one of the themes that we really try to emphasize in this work is that you don't have to be an anti-corruption expert, but it's helpful to have a little bit of knowledge about, just kind of thinking through the multiple ways that both corruption can manifest and how anti-corruption can work. And then assess what works best in your setting and what is going to target the particular things that you're working on most effectively there. So I think it's much more about the opportunity space and a little bit about just being aware of some of the things that can go wrong with different kinds of programming, rather than saying, well, we know this always works or it usually works in various settings. I also was just going to comment on the question about kind of how we define corruption and is there a fair amount of corruption even as we think about our own programming? I think that's a really important question. When we talk about corruption, There are a lot of different definitions, and people, they can range from, policies we don't like are corruption to, only bribes are corruption. So it is an area where people come again with a lot of their own kind of understandings of the situation. There's a very specific definition of corruption that is used by organizations like Transparency International, sort of the leading anti-corruption organization, and that is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. And even that can be broken apart a little bit, and what constitutes private, and who constitutes private, and what is the gain. But I think what we're really trying to look at here are those kinds of misuses of power that create the enabling environment for the environmental ills that we are all trying to address. So lots of things that could be discussed in this setting, and we'd actually love to have further conversations with anybody who's interested. Just to say, now we'll just make a few references to other resources. Rachel has already very ably shared with you a number of the resources that we have. You can always go to tnrcproject.org to learn more. Here's the information about the training, the introductory training, which is available to anyone who wants to take it. In now also in French and Spanish. So hopefully we'll cover more of the world. And then the other thing is just to say, if you are curious about these issues, if your organization is already working on similar things, we'd love to know about it, because I think during the 3.5 years that we've been working on this, we've certainly seen the level of discourse increase. And also the informed nature of the discourse, but we don't know everything that's going on. So this was also a great opportunity for us to reach out to a diverse set of organizations and stakeholders. And we'd love to hear from you if you are working on similar things, and maybe there's even an opportunity for us to partner. I'll leave it there. I don't know exactly where we are with time, but we'll...
Pretty much coming towards a wrap up on this section. Thank you so much. But Enos, I see you've raised a hand.
Yeah, thanks. Just one quick one for Liz Hart. In terms of the corruption menace, and especially within a national boundary, in terms of the project, how did it present itself in terms of transboundary natural resources, for example, in two different countries which are contiguous to each other, but they experience different levels of corruption? What are some of the key challenges that you see in terms of this vis-a-vis within a national boundary? Thanks.
So you're referring to kind of cross-border issues?
Yes, I'm looking at transboundary natural resource management, for example, a project which is cutting across two different national boundaries. And in one of the, within one national boundary, corruption issues are more prominent compared to others. What are some of the key challenges that would emerge in your experience? Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I think, again, we have not, I don't think any of our projects have actually looked specifically at that, but there are some papers, for instance, that are dealing with, there's a paper that's just coming out on free trade zones and special economic zones. And, there was a kind of the animating concern for that paper was, well, these are zones that have different legal systems than the country that they're in. And really what the paper found was that the dynamics are very similar, and it's less about the legal systems and more about who's involved. And so, depending on where your intervention point is, you're going to have to respond to the legal systems and the enabling environment in that setting, whether that's one side of the border or the other. But obviously, then your efforts will potentially look different on different sides of the border. But the other thing to remember is that corruption is usually about people and how they respond to the environment that they're in and what drives them and what facilitates them to participate in corrupt actions. And sometimes that isn't so different on one side or another side of a border as well. So again, assessing what your issue is, where you are, who's involved, and then trying to get a better understanding of why they're involved is probably the starting point for really any project at all.
Great, thank you. And Catherine, I did see you had a hand raised. If you feel free to raise if you wanted to say something, but otherwise we'll move on.
It was a super quick one. Thanks, Will. I just wanted, it was just a comment and a big thank you to the team of, well, both teams, but in particular reference to the second presentation today. I and others on the call do a lot of teaching and training of the conservation standards, and this is something that comes up time and time again, both in the sense that practitioners maybe from all size organizations, but particularly smaller NGOs are saying, well, we feel demoralized, we don't feel like we can act because this whole system is corrupt, or they kind of have corruption on their situation model, but they feel that it's such a big topic and such a scary thing to do that they don't even unpack it at all. So it was just a thank you for kind of moving this work forward and providing guidance, and certainly Claire and myself we'll be recommending this as a potential follow-on resource from the basic conservation standards course that we run in a way to share that further. So yeah, just a thank you from me. Great,
thanks, and thanks everyone. Thanks,
brilliant.
Preston.
Well, thank you so much to Liz and Preston and Rachel for sharing all those great resources. There's a lot to go through and look at, and thank you for the opportunities to engage further. So if anyone would like to take courses or reach out in the conversations, please do go ahead and do that. So thank you so much. We're going to move on now to our business part of the call. So those of you who joined especially for the conservation practice sessions, feel free to drop off now, and we'll see you in due course, and we'll carry on with the business part of the meeting. Thanks, guys.
And maybe just a quick mention that we'll make the recording publicly available to everybody. We'll send it around.
Yeah.
Thanks so
Great.
much. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Lena. Thank you, Ilka. See you soon. Thanks, Rachel. Okay, so business part of the meeting. It will help me, Caroline, if you help keep me on.